Okay, it's on now, so anything you say may be used against you for termination of employment.
Hey, I'm past the probationary period.
doesn't matter.
It has to be for good
Oh,
for good reason now.
well, I think we could probably come up with some good
Could come up
reasons in
with
this
some good
podcast.
reasons, yeah. That's true. That's true.
Well, sum up the election, folks. I mean, for me, I think this, there's a lot to be said about the election. Fascinating characters from all sides. Multiple party platforms. Oh no, that's the federal.
I was going to say I don't. You were following a different election than I was. Yeah.
I have my podcast notes ready for the federal election here.
Okay.
No, but sum it up in one word, Paul. What has this election been all about?
Well, so that's a different question. If I had to use an adjective, I might say insipid, perhaps, like disappointing, not exciting. Like you made mention, we didn't really have party platforms even to compare and contrast until very recently.
Not until like the last week or so, Daniel?
Yeah, the Liberal and NDP came out on Friday, I think, with their platforms. And PCs don't really have one. And then the Greens have had theirs for a while. But.
Yeah. And there wasn't, and the result was, I mean, we'll see, I suppose, but the result was foreseen from the beginning already, right? And very little that's transpired, certainly in terms of who's going to form a government. Nothing that's transpired has changed anything, right? Individual ridings here and there. There's some close ridings where there's been excitement, but otherwise we're in the same spot today that we were 3 weeks ago.
Mm-hmm. Which I suppose was the point, right?
Sure.
That was the point for calling the election early, was an opportunity to basically lock in for another 4 years, kind of where we've been at, right? For the government, and that was the talking points from the other parties that were basically saying, look, this was just another move by the PCs to strengthen their own hand. But I guess the other element of this was when Ford was talking about it originally, there was a conversation about needing a mandate to address Trump. I think that issue sort of faded to the background just because of the 30-day window that was given. But has that still been? What was your guys' sense in terms of is that really what this election's been about?
I think that was convenient cover just for calling an election while you're high in the polls and the opposition parties are weak. Yeah. So my word would probably be shrewd.
There you go.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And we were talking about this just a minute ago, right? That say whatever you will about Doug Ford, and we've all said many things on and off air, some of which we won't repeat for public consumption, but politically, obviously, very savvy, right? He's poised, maybe we're going to get to predictions in a minute, but he's poised to increase his majority, right? It'll be the third, I think, Daniel will be the fact checker, I think, for all of us here, hopefully, but the third consecutive election where he's increased his seat count, right? Yeah. He's increased every time.
Is that the expected outcome, that there's an increase actually in the seats?
I think so.
Yeah.
I mean, at the beginning of the election period, the PCs were polling even higher than they are now. But I looked this morning, and as of polling as of yesterday is I think has the PCs at 88 seats out of 124. So it's a pretty significant majority if that is the result.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What else do we have to say about this? We're a couple days away from the election. I mean, it's on Thursday, right? So we're just a couple days away now. Do you think there's any sort of last minute Hail Mary passes that can happen to make this thing upset, or are we locked in?
So I think we were talking about there's a couple of interesting ridings, right? There are a couple of independent candidates that have a chance in a couple of ridings, and there's a couple of other ridings that are still close. But in terms of a majority government, that would seem to be totally set, right?
Yeah, I think Doug Ford has really been campaigning on. It seems like the less he says, the safer he is. So there's always a risk in an election that someone says something that all of a sudden people get irate about. Mm-hmm. But so far he hasn't done anything like that. He's been pretty even keeled. And with just a few days left and no debates left, that kind of thing, there's not a lot of opportunity for that kind of mistake either.
And I think in terms of personality, I actually think Bonnie Crombie has been more interesting, at least. When you're coming from behind, you maybe have to take more chances anyway. But I think it's been interesting the way in the last couple of days the Liberals have addressed the controversial statements. The PC war room is sifting through a dozen years of tweets and Facebook posts and whatever else for every candidate, and have found a couple of things. Somebody's uncle said something offensive once, and they bring it back up again. And there was a clip, I actually forget the comment or the candidate, but I think in contrast, the previous provincial election, if you remember, Stephen Del Duca, there was a couple of cases where there was a statement that was deemed to be offensive in a candidate's past, and Del Duca, they kicked him out right away, right? They withdrew the support, and there was just this week, there was a Liberal candidate who had said something in his past that was deemed to be offensive, and Bonnie Crombie said something to the effect of, "Yeah, that wasn't great. I probably shouldn't have said that." He apologized. Anyway, let's talk about how Doug Ford is a poor premier and why you should elect us instead. Now that's whether we agree, whether we like the Liberals' platform or not. Just politically, that's at least I think that's a better tact to take, and makes for a more interesting campaign too. So I don't know whether Daniel might have an opinion on whether on her political future in particular. To me, it seems like maybe she has a little bit more staying power, just from how she handled those things versus previous leaders.
Yeah, I mean, there was that, the bus incident, right, where she had this big slogan that she printed on the side of her bus. I can't even remember what it said now, but all I remember was the headlines being, it was factually incorrect. Was it the number of people who died in the healthcare system or something? Something like that.
It was
like
healthcare related.
11,000 or something. Anyway, it was some very high number, and but as far as I know, she hasn't backed down and is still driving the bus around. So, facts don't care about your feelings, I guess, or something like that. But to your point, though, I wonder about the leadership element of this. If that's not a factor in why Ford's doing as well as he is just the lack of recognizability of the other two, and whether if there was a stronger personality, or if Bonnie kind of had a bit more running. I'm on first name basis with her, by the way. If she had a bit more, runway, whether it would have been a bit more interesting potentially. I guess that's a theory. It's hard to know.
No, Ford Nation is a brand, right? And we don't have, say, contrast to our neighbors to the south, for example. We don't have a lot of political brands in Canada, right? Yeah. And Ford Nation is certainly that.
Yeah.
And I think Bonnie Crombie has also struggled to get recognition because she's not an MPP currently. She's known in Mississauga. She was the mayor of Mississauga for a number of years, but she hasn't been in the legislature. The Liberals haven't had their leader there, kind of getting those sound bites and what have you. Right. In question period or that kind of thing. So that makes it hard for the rest of the province to know who she is.
Yeah. You're kind of coming up with your communication strategy on the fly almost, right, with an election like this. Mm-hmm. I wonder, too, whether the interesting thing for me has been the fact that Ford doesn't seem to be affected by what's happening in the States. Like if you look at the federal conservatives at this point, it seems like they're taking a bit of a hit in the polls for whatever reason, whether it's because of some of Trump's actions in the States or something like that. People are sort of attributing that to what a potential federal conservative party could be doing, similar policy. But for some reason, that's not being attributed to Ford. I don't know why, or what sort of insulation he's managing to keep in terms of policy. But
another way of looking at it is that this kind of a crisis caused by an outsider, right? I mean, by the American president, favors incumbents. Right? That people feel a little bit of sympathy for leaders who are trying to defend Canada's interest, Ontario's interest, against someone who seems to be kind of unfairly attacking or threatening those interests. So there is maybe that Ford is in the same position as Trudeau, and that he's the incumbent leader, even though they're from different parties, different parts of the political spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
and I guess this is a many-sided die, but another way to look at it, and maybe we're almost doing a preview of maybe the federal election podcast. We can start later this afternoon maybe, but we may have the federal Conservative popularity in terms of polling over the past 6 months may have been falsely attributed to the popularity of that party and of their leader, whereas actually it's just been a negative reaction to the Prime Minister.
The federal Liberals, yeah.
And as soon as you remove him from the picture and add someone else, add generic Liberal A, then it tightens up much more closer, right? We may have just falsely attributed that change, and as soon as the guy everybody hates is out of the picture, then it's tighter. So that's speaks a little bit to the fact that in Ontario it would seem that the Liberals and or the NDP need a charismatic leader with name recognition to be able to build on in order to unseat.
So, John, to your point, do you think that it's really the tariff part of it that people are polarized by, rather than some of the policy decisions? That's the question I don't think I have clear in my own head in terms of the way it's influencing Canadian politics. Is there an assumption that, if the federal Conservatives get in, they're going to bring along similar, policy directions, so like the executive orders on gender identity, for instance? I know we're getting into federal politics here, but it's the intersection in terms of like how is it not affecting the provincial politics at this point? You're sort of suggesting it's tariffs is the primary concern then, when it comes to Trump, and not policy?
No, just saying that I think the tariff threat is something that gives a bit of a public sympathy for the incumbent. Right. That's all. I don't think people are thinking about it in terms of which party's policy will deal with tariffs better. Right. I'm not sure leaders have been terribly clear on that.
It's
anyway.
just an us versus them at this point, kind of the boo the Americans at the hockey game kind of thing.
Well, and Premier Ford has been in Washington D.C. I think twice during the election campaign, which the opposition parties say is campaigning, but it's he's doing his job and campaigning at the same time kind of thing. But I think it points to the really using the political situation between Canada and the States for this election campaign at the same time.
So obviously throughout this campaign, we've, as ARPA, have been encouraging our supporters to be involved in a number of the issues, particularly sort of the gender identity issue, the issue of euthanasia, just trying to bring attention to the fact that the provincial government does actually have a part to play in bringing about policy change on both these issues. Daniel and John, we had a chance to talk a bit through sort of the history of some of those things. Have we seen any conversation about that this election? And if not, assuming there hasn't been, kind of where can we go from here? Maybe Daniel, you want to start?
Yeah, we really haven't seen. I haven't seen anything about those issues from the party leaders. In the debates, it's kind of just your typical the typical issues that are kind of always discussed at every election. The
finance, healthcare.
Yeah, and I think primarily, like for Doug Ford, this is about responding to Trump. For the Liberals and NDP, it's a healthcare election. So those are kind of the two key issues that are being discussed the most. So yeah, really very little about some of these other big important issues. Something that we'll need to hold the next government to still, to say, hey, you talked about X issues during the election campaign, but there's a lot of other issues that you need to focus on in governing Ontario.
Mm-hmm. And I think we need to bring that pressure to bear, right? Either with the new Ontario government or, again, looking ahead to the federal election, that for the Conservative parties, the provincial and federal, that we're saying it's not good enough to not be the Liberals or the NDP, but these issues of life, right? What you're talking about, Colin, and we can add abortion to that. It's not good enough to not be liberals on this. We need you to take action on these. We want you to talk about these things, because I think what we see, in my own riding, I talked to some candidates. I went to some candidate events, and you can talk to them one-on-one about these things. And what I saw there, and what I know other people have seen, is sometimes you get leaners, right? You get a candidate who might say, "Well, listen, I don't disagree with you, but I can't really talk about it," right? That's not good enough, guys. If these things are not important enough to talk about during an election, or when you have an overwhelming majority government, if you're not willing to touch these things, then those are situations where we have to consider withdrawing support altogether, right? And I think the same goes, not to dominate the conversation here, Colin, the same goes for these smaller parties, right? The Ontario Party, New Blue Party. I think some of their candidates are more socially conservative. A lot of them, that's why they get into it in the first place. But I think we need to hear more from them as a party collectively. We don't just need another party that's kind of slightly to the right of the PCs, or will take take the same set of issues, whether it's healthcare, housing, tariffs, or whatever, and take a slightly different position, but to say, hey, we want to change the conversation entirely. If you're not in it for that, what are you in it for? Right? I think we want to try and encourage that as much as possible.
Well, and I wonder if there's not as ARPA, obviously we're not suggesting that political change only happens through elections either, right? And maybe, John, you can touch on sort of the Let Kids Be campaign and the way that we've been using bus ads a little bit to raise attention to this issue in the province, and how maybe through something like that we could get attention to that issue without an election being involved, without sort of bringing about policy change through more of a grassroots direction. So maybe kind of give the background to what those bus ads are, and then speak to that.
Yeah, so there's been a number of bus ads just with the put the brakes on medical transition for minors, that links to the Let Kids Be site and all the talking points and research there. And thankfully it seems like there's quite a bit of public support for some restrictions on these medical treatments. I think we're stretching the term medicine by calling it that, but so I think when it comes to getting a government to do that, building relationships with members of provincial parliament who are sympathetic to the cause, being realistic, they're not likely to move on it unless they can see that there's popular support for it. But I think there's more polling showing that, and I think with Alberta kind of breaking ground on this policy issue, the hope is that we can build towards some willingness to take action on that in the future. I do think, though, I agree that we, politics and elections is not the only thing that matters, but I think it would help, and maybe in the future, maybe this is wishful thinking, but if we do have elections that are more about education and healthcare, this is an unusual election in that the pretext for it was the threat of tariffs, but that within a conversation that's very much about those major issues, that when you're talking about healthcare, a lot, maybe how many Ontarians are being euthanized can actually come into the conversation, and these kind of alternative parties.
Right, like that's what you were pointing out, the coroner's report that was
right.
showing
right.
deaths that were,
Yeah, and then
like
so
that.
even for kind of people within the conservative base to realize, hey, with more attention on this, we start to ask, do we have in any way an actual conservative policy position on this, or a policy record on this? And if not, for them to have a bit of expectation that the party would actually try to do something on that. And if not, then maybe there starts to become a threat of your base, maybe voting for an alternative party or an independent, but maybe also just not being enthused to volunteer or to donate, and just being dissatisfied, like we've seen with perhaps like previous conservative federal leader. I think that was very much the case with O'Toole, for example, and his deliberate shift to the left or to the center. So those things I think are important. But there's all that said, whether there's a threat of electoral loss in the future for the Progressive Conservatives or not, I think this relationship building plus being able to show the evidence for these policies, the public support for these policies, and being able to build public support and public awareness of these issues through advertising and through kind of grassroots initiatives is important as well.
And I think that's key on this point is that, the media attention that those bus ads have been getting, at least in London, and it's starting to spread beyond that, is a way in which you can get that issue in front of the election, in front of those who are being elected, whether they like it or not, because it's coming up. The media is asking them questions about it, right? And not that we want to be, sort of bullying it in there, but this is an issue that we care about, and we want to see some commentary on it, right?
That's right. And like you said, to demonstrate that there is, on some of these things, on some parts of it, that there is broad public support, right? That even if for our elected representatives to realize that something might be a controversial stance to take on Twitter, we should say on X, I guess, I find it hard to say that, something that might be a controversial issue media-wise is not controversial, is common sense to a large proportion of the Canadian population, right? And so to show them that there is broad support for, say, rolling back euthanasia law and that sort of thing, protecting children from gender reassignment, to say, yeah, even though the echo chamber of progressive social media might make this seem like an untouchable subject, actually it's not. If you look at just broad opinion polling, and even some of the facts of the case, right? I had a situation speaking to a candidate from not from the PCs, from another party, and we told him some of the facts from the coroner's report on subjects of euthanasia, and his eyes were as big as silver dollars, right? Mm-hmm. Now, once we sent him the report and we sent him some information, and once his team has a chance to go through it, I'm sure he'll still toe the party line at the end. But you could tell in that moment that was news to him. He didn't think it was great. He thought this was a problem, and so that's even bringing some of these facts to light, which are I think inconvenient truths in some ways, right?
Well, and I think that's why, you had opportunity to be part of that directly, and I think that's what we were also encouraging people to be doing throughout this election process because of those kinds of moments, right? Those in-person opportunities to put a question to somebody to say, look, were you aware of this? And that can make a difference too. Obviously, we're running into the last couple days of the election at this point. What is the election predictions from everyone? So maybe just for context, one of the fun things that we do around the table here is within the ARPA staff, we each kind of send in our predictions to Levi, who kind of records it for everyone. And then we see, he has a whole fancy spreadsheet to see who got the closest within 1 or 2 seats or more, depending on how far off we are. So for me, I predicted this a couple weeks ago, so this is, the current data is showing a little bit different, but the Conservatives at 99, Progressive Conservatives, Libs at 10, NDP at 13, Greens at 1, and Independents with 1. Now...
Did you say 99?
Yes, I did.
Okay. That's bold stance. Okay.
Yes. Well, so part of that is actually self-interested because I'm interested to see what happens if Liberals or NDP, if there's no opposition party. So that's kind of if there's nothing interesting happening during this election, then, at least there'll be something interesting to happen after it if neither of them have official party status. But although I guess, what is it? Is it 12? Is 12 official? Okay, so I'm predicting NDP at 13 just to interrupt that prediction. But anyway, and then in terms of voter turnout's the other one that's going to be interesting. I think you had mentioned, Daniel, that it was 43% or something like that in the last election,
which was the lowest ever.
Lowest ever, yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway, I went with a very safe 42.8 prediction. Where are you at, Daniel?
For voter turnout, I don't know, maybe like 40.
Oh yeah.
I think it's good. I definitely think it's going to drop from 2022 just because you just get the sense that people aren't that interested in this election. even seeing on the news this morning, advance polls just closed on Saturday, and advance polls were 6.1%, which again is lower than advance polls usually turn out. It's usually in the higher 6% range, all the way up to 10. And usually there's a longer period to 6 days instead of the 3 that we had. But I think that's an indicator of people aren't that excited. How many people are going to go out and vote on a Thursday after work?
And I think you like the result is set. I don't mean in a devious kind of way, but it seems predictably obvious. The weather is poor in a lot of the province. I think some people are actually, which election is this? Because there's the federal, right? Is it Kearney? Is it Freeland? What's happening there? Which election is that? I think it's a perfect storm. What's the opposite of a perfect storm? It's the
Utter
there's
silence?
it's total. There's I think there's just nothing happening. So I'm jumping ahead. I'm at 38. I think it's going to be a historic low.
Wow. Dropping below 40, eh?
I
Getting
thought
close
it
to
was
like
carefully,
only,
but,
no?
Yeah, I think it's gonna be low too. I don't know how low. But.
You have to pick a number.
40
the point,
41.
if you could just participate.
41,
okay,
no.
thank you.
Everybody's quite a
Yeah.
bit lower than me, so I don't know if that doesn't indicate very well for me. But what about seat numbers? Anyone want to cast their seat with numbers out there?
When I guessed a couple weeks ago, I said 97 for the PCs. I don't remember what other numbers I had. I do think probably one independent that there was one independent who won in 2022 as well. So I think she can probably repeat. But yeah, since then the polling has dropped off a bit. I didn't expect the Liberals and NDP to gain as much traction as they have. So we'll see what happens in the next couple days.
So the polling numbers, like for the Conservatives, have come down a little bit then in terms of
Yeah,
their seat numbers.
yeah, because when I guessed 97, I think they were polling at like 100 seats,
Okay.
which would be wild.
Which is
No.
why I predicted 99, because I just basically look at polls and then extrapolate out
Take a
from
little
there.
bit,
All right. Well, their numbers are there. We'll see what happens on Thursday. So we're here in Ottawa because of the God and Government Youth Conference that's happening this week. So we're gonna have a bunch of us maybe watching together, and we'll see how close we get.
And I think we could, it feels like we're drawing to a close here, but I think, as much as we've had some fun with this, and I think we've expressed some dismay at how the election period has gone, but just a word of encouragement for everybody listening, right? For all the ARPA supporters, as soon as your new, whether it's the previous MPP is back in again, or you have a new MPP, reach out to him or her quickly. You can start with a congratulations on your victory. You can add a note of and by the way, whichever party it is, right? Congratulate on your victory. We'll be in prayer for you, that you'll have wisdom, that you'll rule well. Start off on a strong note. If you don't already have that relationship and you've been thinking, that's something I would like to do, I think as far as around this table, Daniel's the expert at building those relationships. I think it's easier to start on that note than to come in right away with, here are my 5 policy priorities that I want you to take up during this session. So just to start with a note of welcome, that you'll be in prayer for them. Do that the first week after the election. Start off on a
Slogan we
strong
use,
note.
right? Relationship first, policy second. So.
Right.
I think generally to pray for the government too, that they will at least begin to prioritize some of these other very important issues that have been neglected in the past few months and years.
All right. Well, from the Ontario Election Podcast, signing off.